The afternoon sun beat down on Pine Creek Estates, a neighborhood where most people kept to themselves. Officer Rebecca Taylor drove her patrol car slowly down Maple Avenue. Her window rolled down just enough to catch the scent of freshly cut grass. She'd been with the department for 8 years and considered this area her territory. Nothing much happened here, which was exactly how she liked it. At the corner house with the well-kept garden and blue shutters, a dark sedan pulled into the driveway. Officer Taylor slowed her car, watching as a woman in scrubs stepped out. Dr. Amara Wilson had just finished a 12-hour shift at Memorial Hospital. Her shoulders ached from standing over an operating table for hours, but the surgery had been successful. All she wanted now was to kick off her shoes and pour herself a glass of wine. Officer Taylor narrowed her eyes. She didn't recognize the woman, though the house had belonged to the Wilson family for nearly a decade. Something about seeing Dr. Wilson, a black woman unloading groceries in this predominantly white neighborhood, triggered something in Officer Taylor. She pulled her patrol car to the curb and radioed in that she was investigating suspicious activity. Just a quick check, she told herself as she adjusted her uniform and stepped out of the vehicle. Dr. Wilson was juggling 3 grocery bags when she noticed the police officer approaching. She set the bags on the hood of her car, wondering what could be wrong. "Good afternoon," Dr. Wilson called out with a tired smile. The weight of the day showed in the slight slump of her shoulders, but her voice remained warm and professional, the same voice she used to reassure nervous patients. Officer Taylor didn't return the greeting. Instead, her hand moved to rest on her holster, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Dr. Wilson. "Do you live here?" Officer Taylor demanded, her tone sharp enough to cut through the peaceful afternoon air. Dr. Wilson blinked, the question catching her off guard. "Yes, I do. This is my home." "Is something wrong, officer?" "I need to see some ID," Officer Taylor said, taking another step forward. Her posture had changed, becoming more rigid, more confrontational. Dr. Wilson felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach, the same feeling she got when she was the only black doctor in a room full of colleagues who questioned her credentials. "My ID is in my purse, which is inside the house. I was just bringing in my groceries first," she explained calmly. "May I ask why you need to see my identification at my own home?" Something flashed in Officer Taylor's eyes. Irritation at being questioned, perhaps, or something deeper. "I don't recognize you from this neighborhood, and we've had reports of break-ins." This was a lie. There had been no such reports. The neighborhood hadn't seen a break-in in over 2 years. "I've lived here for 9 years, Dr. Wilson replied, maintaining her composure despite the growing unease she felt. "I'm a surgeon at Memorial Hospital. I just got off shift and wanted to get some groceries before coming home." Instead of acknowledging this reasonable explanation, Officer Taylor's hand gripped her holster more tightly. "When an officer asks for identification, you provide it. Turn around and put your hands where I can see them." Dr. Wilson felt her heart rate quicken, but she kept her voice steady. "Officer, I'm standing in my own driveway. I haven't done anything wrong. If you give me a moment, I can get my ID from inside." Officer Taylor unsnapped her holster. "I said turn around. Now." The raised voice caught the attention of Mrs. Patel next door, who had been watering her roses. She set down her watering can and moved closer to her fence, watching the scene with growing concern. Dr. Wilson slowly raised her hands to shoulder height, keeping them visible. Her years of training in high-pressure situations helped her remain outwardly calm, though her mind raced. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm just trying to enter my own home after work." Officer Taylor drew her weapon. Time seemed to slow down. The grocery bags on the car hood, the sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street, the feeling of sweat forming on Dr. Wilson's forehead that had nothing to do with the heat. "Get on the ground!" Officer Taylor shouted, her gun now pointed directly at Dr. Wilson. Mrs. Patel gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. From across the street, Mr. Chen, who had been checking his mail, froze in place, his eyes wide with disbelief. Dr. Wilson's medical training kicked in. Stay calm in emergencies, don't make sudden movements. I'm going to kneel down slowly, she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the gun pointed at her chest. Please don't shoot. There are groceries in my car. There's mail addressed to me in my mailbox. I live here. As she carefully lowered herself to one knee, she noticed more neighbors appearing, some on porches, others peering through windows. Mr. Rodriguez from 2 doors down had stepped onto his lawn, phone in hand, clearly recording the incident. Both. Knees, hands behind your head, Officer Taylor barked, her voice carrying an edge of something that went beyond professional authority. Something personal, something ugly. Dr. Wilson complied, the pavement rough against her knees, soiling her. Scrubs, the same scrubs in which she'd saved a life just hours earlier. Officer, my hospital ID is in my car. Can I slowly reach for it? Don't move. The gun in Officer Taylor's hand trembled slightly, betraying her escalating emotions. By now, several neighbors had gathered at a safe distance. Mrs. Patel had her phone out too, recording the scene while speaking urgently into it. Mr. Chen had moved closer, his face a mask of concern and outrage. That's Dr. Wilson, he called out, his voice tight with tension. She lives here, she's our neighbor. Officer Taylor didn't lower her weapon, but her eyes darted to the growing crowd of witnesses. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. I've called 911, Mrs. Patel announced loudly, and the sheriff's office directly. This is wrong. Dr. Wilson remained on her knees, hands behind her head, breathing deeply to stay calm. Despite her composed exterior, her thoughts whirled. How many times had she heard stories like this? How many times had she treated patients who'd been traumatized by similar encounters? Now it was happening to her, on her own property in front of her own home. Mr. Rodriguez stepped closer, his phone still recording. Officer, we all know Dr. Wilson. She performs surgeries at Memorial. She saved my wife last year. What are you doing? Officer Taylor's eyes narrowed at him. Stay back. This is police business. This is harassment, called another voice, Ms. Thompson from across the street, a retired high school principal who had joined the growing group of witnesses. She's lived here longer than you've been on the force. The gathering crowd seemed to fuel Officer Taylor's anxiety rather than cause her to reassess the situation. Her grip on the gun tightened, and a bead of sweat trickled down her temple despite the cooling afternoon air. Dr. Wilson, still kneeling with her hands behind her, head spoke again. Her voice remained remarkably steady. Officer, there's clearly been a mistake. All these people know me. I'm just trying to go into my home after work. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder by the second. Multiple neighbors had called, not just 911, but had contacted the county sheriff's office directly. They knew the sheriff, a fair and respected figure in the community, would want to know about this immediately. Officer Taylor's eyes darted toward the sound of approaching sirens, then back to Dr. Wilson, then to the crowd of witnesses, with their phones recording every moment. Something like panic began to replace the anger in her expression as she realized the situation had spiraled far beyond a routine stop. Yet she didn't lower her weapon. As the first sheriff's vehicle turned onto Maple Avenue, the red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in alternating colors, Dr. Wilson closed her eyes briefly and said a silent prayer of thanks that she might survive this encounter, an encounter that had started with nothing more than her trying to bring groceries into her own home. The cell phone in Mr. Rodriguez's hand felt warm as he continued recording. His fingers trembled slightly, but he kept the camera steady, focused on the scene unfolding in Dr. Wilson's driveway. This wasn't just a video, it was evidence. In his 20 years living in Pine Creek Estates, he'd never witnessed anything like this. Keep recording, Mrs. Patel whispered fiercely from beside him. Don't stop. More neighbors joined the growing crowd. Mrs. Thompson, the retired principal, had positioned herself at the edge of Dr. Wilson's lawn, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The Johnsons from down the street stood with their teenage son, who was also recording with his phone. Even old Mr. Byrne, who rarely left his house, stood watching from his porch, his face twisted with concern. Officer Taylor's gun remained pointed at Dr. Wilson, who still knelt on the pavement, hands behind. Her head, Despite the humiliation of being forced to kneel in her own driveway, Dr. Wilson's face showed remarkable composure. Years of handling medical crises had taught her to manage her emotions in life-threatening situations. Still, a single bead of sweat rolled down her temple, betraying the fear she worked so hard to contain. "I've got this whole thing from the beginning," Mr. Rodriguez called out loud enough for Officer Taylor to hear. "Started recording the second she pulled that gun." The officer's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Dr. Wilson. The approaching sirens grew louder, but Officer Taylor made no move to holster her weapon. Mrs. Patel stepped forward, her phone still recording. "I called Sheriff Daniels directly," she announced. "Told her exactly what's happening here. She knows Dr. Wilson personally. Treated her mother last year after her heart attack." A flash of something, uncertainty, perhaps even fear, crossed Officer Taylor's face. Dr. Wilson spoke again, her voice remarkably steady. "Officer, the sheriff is on her way. Maybe we can all take a breath and de-escalate this situation. I'm still on my knees with my hands behind my head. I'm not a threat to you or anyone else." Officer Taylor's grip on her gun tightened. "Stay exactly where you are and don't move." Mr. Chen, who had remained quiet until now, stepped forward. "Young lady," he said, addressing Officer Taylor with the stern tone he'd used during his 40 years as a high school teacher, "you are making a terrible mistake. Dr. Wilson has lived here for 9 years. She's saved lives at Memorial Hospital, including my wife's." The small crowd murmured in agreement. Mrs. Thompson added, "She volunteers at the community center every other Saturday, teaches health classes for free. She coached my daughter's soccer team last spring," another voice called out. One by one, the neighbors shared stories about Dr. Wilson, how she'd checked on Mr. Byrne during the big snowstorm last winter, how she'd helped the Johnson boy with his science project on human anatomy, how she always brought homemade cookies to neighborhood meetings. With each story, Officer Taylor seemed to shrink just a little, though her gun remained pointed at Dr. Wilson. The approaching sirens grew louder, and red and blue lights flashed at the entrance to the neighborhood. The first sheriff's vehicle would arrive any moment. "Officer," Dr. Wilson said quietly, "I understand you're doing your job, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. I live here. These people know me, the sheriff knows me. Please, let's resolve this peacefully." A trickle of sweat ran down Officer Taylor's face. The crowd had grown to at least 15 people now, all watching, many recording. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. This was supposed to be a routine. Check, the kind she'd done dozens of times before when someone didn't look like they belonged in this neighborhood. Mrs. Patel's phone rang, and she answered it without lowering her recording hand. "Yes, Sheriff. Yes, she still has her gun drawn. No, Dr. Wilson is cooperating completely, on her knees with hands behind her head. Yes, we're all watching. At least 10 of us are recording everything." Officer Taylor's eyes widened. At the one-sided conversation, for the first time, genuine alarm showed on her face. The first sheriff's vehicle turned onto Maple Avenue, siren wailing, lights flashing. It was followed by a second, then a third. The situation had clearly been reported as a high-priority incident. "They're sending 3 cars," Mr. Rodriguez whispered to Mr. Chen. "Good. They're taking this seriously." The first vehicle pulled up, parking at an angle that partially blocked Officer Taylor's patrol car. The door swung open and a deputy stepped out. Deputy Harrison, a young officer known for his level-headedness. He assessed the scene quickly, his hand moving to rest near his holster without drawing his weapon. "Officer Taylor," he called out, "what's the situation here?" Before she could answer, the second sheriff's vehicle arrived, and out stepped Sheriff Daniels herself. Even from a distance, the neighbors could see the fury in her expression as she took in the scene. Officer Taylor with her gun drawn on a kneeling Dr. Wilson, surrounded by a crowd of concerned citizens with recording phones. "Everyone stay calm," Sheriff Daniels called out as she approached. Her voice carried authority without aggression. "Deputy Harrison, secure the perimeter. Deputy Lopez, stay with the vehicles." The third car had arrived, and Deputy Lopez nodded at the sheriff's instruction, remaining by the vehicles but watching the situation carefully. Sheriff Daniels approached slowly, her own hand nowhere near her weapon. "Officer Taylor," she said, her voice steady but cold. "Holster your weapon. Now." Officer Taylor hesitated, her gun still trained on Dr. Wilson. "That was not a suggestion, officer," the sheriff said, her voice harder now. "Holster your weapon." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The neighbors held their collective breath. Dr. Wilson remained perfectly still, her knees beginning to ache from the hard pavement. Finally, Officer Taylor lowered her gun and returned it to her holster, though her hand remained near it. "Step away from Dr. Wilson," Sheriff Daniels ordered next. "Deputy Harrison, please escort Officer Taylor to her vehicle." As Deputy Harrison approached, Officer Taylor's posture changed. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time she seemed to fully grasp the severity of what she had done and what might happen next. "Dr. Wilson," Sheriff Daniels said, her tone completely different now. Respectful, concerned. "Are you all right? Can you stand?" Dr. Wilson nodded and slowly rose to her feet, wincing slightly as she straightened her stiff knees. "I'm okay, Sheriff. Thank you for coming so quickly." "Don't thank me," the sheriff replied. "Thank your neighbors. We got at least 12 calls in the span of 3 minutes." She turned to the crowd. "Thank you all for looking out for Dr. Wilson. We'll need statements from everyone who witnessed this incident." The neighbors nodded, many of them moving closer now that the immediate danger had passed. Mrs. Patel hurried forward with a bottle of water for Dr. Wilson, while Mr. Rodriguez offered her his jacket to sit on, so she wouldn't have to stand on her sore legs. "I have the whole thing recorded," Mr. Rodriguez told the sheriff, holding up his phone, "from the moment Officer Taylor approached Dr. Wilson's driveway." "So do I," Mrs. Patel added. "And me," said Mr. Johnson's teenage son. "Me too," called Mrs. Thompson. One by one, at least 8 neighbors indicated they had video evidence of the entire encounter. Sheriff Daniels nodded grimly. "We'll need all of that footage, and we'll need formal statements from each of you." She turned back to Dr. Wilson. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, Doctor. This is not how the members of our law enforcement community are trained to behave." "Doctor." Wilson took a deep breath, the professional calm she'd maintained beginning to crack now that the immediate danger had passed. "I just want to understand why this happened. I was simply bringing groceries into my own home after work." The sheriff's expression darkened as she glanced toward Officer Taylor, who now sat in the back of Deputy Harrison's vehicle, her face pale. "We're going to get to the bottom of that, I promise you." The crowd of neighbors had not dispersed. If anything, it had grown larger as word spread through the community about what had happened. They formed a protective circle around Dr. Wilson, offering water, support, and their unwavering witness to what had just occurred. As the adrenaline began to fade, Dr. Wilson felt the full weight of what had just happened settle onto her shoulders. She had nearly been shot in her own driveway simply for existing in a space where Officer Taylor had decided she didn't belong. But she hadn't faced it alone. Looking around at the neighbors who had rallied around her, people of different ages, backgrounds, and races who had all recognized the injustice unfolding before them and refused to remain silent, Dr. Wilson felt something powerful rising within her. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But whatever came next, she would face it with this community standing beside her. Sheriff Daniels stood with her back straight and her eyes focused, a commanding presence despite her average height. At 48, she had worked her way up through the ranks over 25 years, earning respect through consistency, fairness, and an unwavering commitment to proper procedure. As the county's first black female sheriff, she had faced her share of challenges, but those experiences had only strengthened her resolve to ensure equal justice for everyone in her jurisdiction. The scene before her made her blood boil, though her face revealed only professional concern. Dr. Wilson, a respected surgeon who had operated on Sheriff Daniels' own mother last year, was now accepting a bottle of water from Mrs. Patel, her scrubs dirty from kneeling on the pavement. A few feet away, Officer Taylor sat in the back of Deputy Harrison's vehicle, looking considerably less confident than she had moments before. "Deputy Lopez," Sheriff Daniels called, "please take Dr. Wilson's initial statement. I want a review, the body cam footage immediately, Deputy Lopez nodded and moved toward Dr. Wilson with a notepad in hand. He was a 10-year veteran of the department with a reputation for thoroughness and compassion. Sheriff Daniels approached Officer Taylor's patrol car and opened the door. "Step out, officer." Officer Taylor complied. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated. She avoided making eye contact with the sheriff. "Your body cam is active, correct?" Sheriff Daniels asked, though it wasn't really a question. Department policy required body cams to be activated during all citizen interactions. "Yes, ma'am," Officer Taylor replied quietly. "Good. Let's review the footage." Sheriff Daniels gestured to her department SUV, where a laptop was mounted on a special dash compartment. "Deputy Harrison, please continue taking witness statements." As they walked toward the sheriff's vehicle, the crowd of neighbors parted, silently, their eyes following Officer Taylor with expressions ranging from disappointment to outright anger. The officer kept her gaze fixed on the ground. Once inside the sheriff's SUV, Sheriff Daniels connected to Officer Taylor's body cam feed. The footage began playing on the laptop screen, showing Officer Taylor's approach to Dr. Wilson's driveway. The audio was crystal clear. "Do you live here?" Officer Taylor's voice was immediately confrontational. "Yes, I do. This is my home." "Is something wrong, officer?" Dr. Wilson's response was calm and respectful. "I need to see some ID. My ID is in my purse, which is inside the house. I was just bringing in my groceries first. May I ask why you need to see my identification at my own home?" "I don't recognize you from this neighborhood, and we've had reports of break-ins." Sheriff Daniels paused the video. "What break-ins, Officer Taylor? We haven't had a reported break-in in Pine Creek Estates in over 2 years." Officer Taylor shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I thought there might have been some reports." "You thought wrong," Sheriff Daniels said evenly, before resuming the video. The footage continued, showing the rapid escalation. Officer Taylor's hand moving to her holster. Dr. Wilson's calm explanation that she lived there. Officer Taylor drawing. Her weapon. Neighbors beginning to gather. Sheriff Daniels watched the entire interaction without speaking, her expression growing darker by the second. When the video reached the point where she herself arrived on the scene, she stopped the playback. "Officer Taylor," she said, turning to face the younger woman, "would you care to explain to me why you drew your weapon on an unarmed civilian who was simply unloading groceries in her own driveway?" Officer Taylor's gaze remained fixed on her hands. She was uncooperative. "Uncooperative?" Sheriff Daniels repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "I just watched the entire interaction. Dr. Wilson was nothing but cooperative. She explained that she lived there. She explained that her ID was inside. She offered to get it for you. At no point did she make any threatening movements. But she questioned why I was asking for ID." Officer Taylor protested weakly. "As is her right, Sheriff," Daniels countered. "Citizens are allowed to ask why they're being detained or questioned, especially on their own property." She tapped the screen. "What I saw here was a textbook example of escalation where de-escalation was called for. You created a potentially deadly situation out of nothing." Officer Taylor finally looked up, a flash of defiance in her eyes. "I was following my training to maintain control of the situation." "No," Sheriff Daniels said firmly. "You were not. Your training explicitly states that you do not draw your weapon unless there is an imminent threat to yourself or others." "Was Dr. Wilson threatening you, Officer Taylor?" "Not physically, but was she armed?" "No, but was she making any sudden movements?" "No." "Then why did you draw your weapon?" Sheriff Daniels asked, her voice level despite her rising anger. Officer Taylor fell silent. Sheriff Daniels sighed heavily. "Officer Taylor, I'm placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately. I'll need your badge and your service weapon." "What?" Officer Taylor's head snapped up, genuine shock in her eyes. "But you were just what?" Sheriff Daniels interrupted. "Just following your instincts? Well, your instincts led you to draw a weapon on an unarmed surgeon in scrubs who was bringing groceries into her own home." She held out her hand. "Badge and weapon now." Outside the sheriff's vehicle, the neighborhood gathering had grown. News traveled fast in Pine Creek Estates. Dr. Wilson sat on the Johnson family's portable lawn chair, still in her scrubs, recounting the events to Deputy Lopez. Despite her outward composure, her hands trembled slightly as she sipped from a water bottle. Mrs. Thompson had brought out a tray of lemonade for the neighbors who had gathered in solidarity. Mr. Rodriguez was showing his video footage to Deputy Harrison, who nodded grimly as he watched. The door of the sheriff's SUV opened and Sheriff Daniels emerged, followed by Officer Taylor. The crowd fell silent, all eyes on the two women. Officer Taylor has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, Sheriff Daniels announced. Her voice carried across the lawn, clear and firm. I want to assure everyone that this incident will be thoroughly investigated and appropriate action will be taken. Officer Taylor stood beside, her head bowed, her badge and service weapon now in Sheriff Daniels' possession. The transformation was striking. The same officer who had held a gun on Dr. Wilson just 30 minutes earlier now looked small and defeated. Sheriff Daniels turned to Dr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson, I cannot apologize enough for what happened here today. This is not how members of my department are trained to behave, and it is certainly not how they are expected to interact with the citizens we are sworn to protect and serve. Dr. Wilson nodded, accepting the apology with dignity. Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate your quick response today. Sheriff Daniels approached Dr. Wilson and lowered her voice. Once you've given your statement, I'd like you to be checked out at the hospital just to be safe. Traumatic events like this can affect us in ways we don't immediately recognize. I'm fine, really, Dr. Wilson began, then paused, reconsidering. But you're right. Protocol is protocol, even for doctors. Sheriff Daniels smiled slightly at that. Especially for doctors, I'd say. You all make the worst patients, according to my mother. This brought a small but genuine smile to Dr. Wilson's face. Your mother is a wise woman. That she is, Sheriff Daniels agreed. And she's very grateful for what you did for her last year. Said you have the steadiest hands she's ever seen. The sheriff's expression grew serious again. Which makes what happened today even more inexcusable. Those hands save lives. Officer Taylor stood awkwardly to the side, watching the interaction. The contrast was stark. The respect and warmth between Sheriff Daniels and Dr. Wilson versus the unwarranted suspicion and aggression she herself had shown. Sheriff Daniels turned back to address the gathered neighbors. I want to thank all of you for acting so quickly today. Your calls and your video evidence will be crucial to our investigation. Mr. Byrne, the elderly man who rarely left his house, spoke up. Will she be fired? He asked bluntly, nodding toward Officer Taylor. Sheriff Daniels answered carefully. There will be a thorough investigation following proper procedure. I can't prejudge the outcome, but I can assure you that I take incidents like this extremely seriously. Officer Taylor's face flushed red. Whether from embarrassment or anger wasn't clear. Deputy Harrison will escort Officer Taylor back to the station to process her administrative leave, Sheriff Daniels continued. Deputy Lopez will continue taking statements from witnesses. As Deputy Harrison led Officer Taylor to his vehicle, the gathered neighbors watched in silence. The officer who had arrived with such aggressive authority was now leaving in disgrace, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Once Officer Taylor was in the deputy's car, Mrs. Patel approached Sheriff Daniels. This isn't the first time, you know, she said quietly. I've seen her patrol this neighborhood before, stopping people who she thinks don't belong here. Has she drawn her weapon before? Sheriff Daniels asked sharply. No, not that I've seen, Mrs. Patel replied. But the way she speaks to certain people, it's not right. Sheriff Daniels nodded grimly. We'll be looking into her prior conduct, I assure you. She turned back to Dr. Wilson. Is there someone who can stay with you tonight? Family? Or a friend? My sister is on her way, Dr. Wilson replied. She should be here soon. Good, Sheriff Daniels said. In the meantime, let's get you inside and comfortable. You've been through enough today. She offered her hand to help Dr. Wilson up from the lawn chair. As they walked toward Dr. Wilson's front door, grocery bags still sitting forgotten on the hood of her car, the sheriff spoke quietly. Dr. Wilson, I promise you, this will not be brushed under the rug. What happened today was wrong and there will be consequences. Dr. Wilson nodded, finally allowing some of her exhaustion and shock to show. Thank you, Sheriff. That means a lot coming from you. 3 days had passed since the incident in Dr. Wilson's driveway. The neighborhood had settled back into its usual rhythm, but beneath the surface things had changed. Neighbors who had barely spoken before now greeted each other with nods of recognition, bound by their shared experience as witnesses. Mrs. Patel had organized a meal train for Dr. Wilson, who had taken a week off from the hospital at her sister's insistence. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Sheriff Daniels' office as she reviewed the stack of witness statements on her desk. Each one told the same story from a slightly different angle. Officer Taylor's unwarranted aggression, Dr. Wilson's remarkable composure, the community's swift response. The body cam footage had been reviewed by the sheriff's internal affairs team, along with 8 separate videos recorded by neighbors. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Deputy Chief Reynolds entered, carrying a thick file folder. At 56, he had been with the department for over 30 years and had seen plenty of changes, not all of them welcome. When Sheriff Daniels was first elected 4 years ago, he had been skeptical of serving under a woman, let alone a black woman. But her leadership had won him over, and he was now one of her strongest supporters. "I've got Officer Taylor's personnel file," he said, placing the folder on the sheriff's desk. "And the results of the record search you requested." Sheriff Daniels opened the folder. "Let's see what we've got here." The file contained Officer Taylor's 8-year history with the department, performance reviews, commendations, complaints, and incident reports. Most of it looked fairly standard at first glance. "Anything stand out to you?" she asked Reynolds. He nodded grimly. Page 27. The pattern analysis of her traffic stops and field interviews. Sheriff Daniels flipped to the indicated page and frowned. The data had been compiled and analyzed by the department's new accountability unit, created 2 years ago as part of Sheriff Daniels' reform efforts. The numbers told a disturbing story. Officer Taylor's interactions with minorities were disproportionately higher than those with white citizens, even accounting for the demographics of her patrol areas. Moreover, the tone and language documented in those interactions showed a clear pattern of escalation rather than de-escalation. "How did we miss this?" Sheriff Daniels asked, looking up at Reynolds. He sighed heavily. The individual incidents never crossed the threshold for formal discipline. It's only when you look at the pattern that it becomes clear. "And we've only been tracking this data for 2 years, Sheriff Daniels added, understanding the implication. "So this is likely just the tip of the iceberg." "There's more," Reynolds said, pointing to another section of the file. 3 civilian complaints in the past 18 months, all from minority residents claiming they were treated with unnecessary suspicion or hostility. All were dismissed due to lack of corroborating evidence. "No video," Sheriff Daniels muttered, understanding the significance. "Not like this time." "Exactly." Reynolds took a seat across from her desk. "The difference is that this time we have multiple witnesses, multiple videos, and body cam footage. There's no ambiguity here." Sheriff Daniels leaned back in her chair, considering the implications. "We need to look at those previous complaints again. If there's a pattern." "I already pulled those files," Reynolds said, sliding another folder across the desk. "I figured you'd want to review them." Sheriff Daniels smiled slightly. "This is why I promoted you, Reynolds." He returned the smile, but it quickly faded. "There's something else you should know. Officer Taylor has retained legal counsel. Word is she's planning to fight the administrative leave." "On what grounds?" Sheriff Daniels asked, incredulous. "Procedural errors, apparently. Her lawyer is claiming we didn't follow proper protocol in the field." Sheriff Daniels shook her head. "That won't fly. I followed the book to the letter, and we have it all on video." "I know that and you know that," Reynolds replied, "but they're going to try to muddy the waters, make it about procedure rather than conduct." A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Deputy Lopez entered, looking somewhat flustered. Sorry to interrupt, Sheriff, but Dr. Wilson is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Sheriff Daniels and Reynolds exchanged glances. Send her in, Sheriff Daniels said, closing the file folders on her desk. A moment later, Dr. Wilson entered the office. She looked more rested than she had 3 days ago, but there was a new intensity in her eyes, a look Sheriff Daniels recognized from her own mirror. Dr. Wilson, please have a seat, Sheriff Daniels said, gesturing to the chair beside Reynolds. You know Deputy Chief Reynolds, I believe? Dr. Wilson nodded at Reynolds before turning her attention to the sheriff. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I've been doing a lot of thinking over the past few days. That's understandable, Sheriff Daniels replied. How are you feeling? Physically, I'm fine, Dr. Wilson said. Emotionally, that's more complicated. But I'm not here to talk about my feelings. I'm here because I've made a decision. Sheriff Daniels leaned forward slightly. What kind of decision? I've decided not to let this incident be just another statistic, Dr. Wilson said firmly. I've spoken with an attorney and I'm planning to file a formal complaint against Officer Taylor. But more importantly, I want to work with your department on addressing the underlying issues that led to this incident. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Dr. Wilson, while we appreciate your interest, I should inform you that there's already an internal investigation underway. With all due respect, Deputy Chief, Dr. Wilson interrupted. Internal. Investigations have their place, but they're not enough. This isn't just about one officer. It's about systems and cultures that allow these incidents to happen in the first place. Sheriff Daniels raised a hand to stop Reynolds from responding. I think we should hear Dr. Wilson out. She turned to the doctor. What exactly are you proposing? Dr. Wilson reached into her bag and pulled out a folder of her own. I've done some research on successful police reform initiatives across the country, programs that have reduced use of force incidents and improved community relations. She handed the folder to Sheriff Daniels. I believe that with my medical background and this recent, personal experience, I could help implement similar programs here. Sheriff Daniels opened the folder and glanced at its contents. Detailed information on community oversight committees, de-escalation training programs, and data-driven approaches to identifying problem officers before incidents occurred. This is comprehensive, Sheriff Daniels said, genuinely impressed. I'm a surgeon, Dr. Wilson replied with a small smile. Thoroughness is a professional requirement. Reynolds leaned forward to look at the materials. Some of these initiatives would require significant resources and policy changes. It's not as simple as just deciding to implement them. I'm aware of that, Dr. Wilson acknowledged, but sometimes it takes an incident like this to create momentum for change. She looked directly at Sheriff Daniels. And I believe you were already heading in this direction with some of your reforms. Sheriff Daniels nodded slowly. That's true. We've made progress, but not enough, clearly. She closed the folder and handed it to Reynolds. I'd like you to review this material and give me your assessment. Reynolds took the folder with a nod, though his expression remained cautious. As for Officer Taylor, Sheriff Daniels continued, turning back to Dr. Wilson, we've uncovered some concerning patterns in her conduct. The investigation is ongoing, but I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously. I appreciate that, Dr. Wilson said. And I should tell you that the video Mr. Rodriguez recorded has received over 50,000 views online since yesterday. Both Sheriff Daniels and Reynolds straightened in their chairs. 50,000? Reynolds repeated. Dr. Wilson nodded. Mr. Rodriguez posted it with my permission. The local news stations have picked it up and apparently it's been shared by several civil rights organizations. Sheriff Daniels sighed. I was hoping to handle this without a media circus. With respect, Sheriff, Dr. Wilson said. Sometimes public attention is necessary for accountability. I didn't seek it out, but now that it's happening, I intend to use it constructively. Before Sheriff Daniels could respond, her phone rang. She glanced at the display. It's the county commissioner, she said, looking up at Reynolds and Dr. Wilson. I should take this. Dr. Wilson stood. Of course, we can continue this conversation another time. Actually, Sheriff Daniels said, I'd like you to stay if you're willing. The commissioner should hear directly from you. Dr. Wilson hesitated, then nodded and sat back down. Sheriff Daniels answered the phone, putting it on speaker. Commissioner Fletcher, I have Deputy Chief Reynolds and Dr. Amara Wilson in my office. You're on speaker. Dr. Wilson is there? The commissioner's voice sounded surprised, then quickly shifted to a more diplomatic tone. Dr. Wilson, let me first say how disturbed I was to learn about what happened to you. It's completely unacceptable. Thank you, Commissioner, Dr. Wilson replied evenly. Sheriff Daniels, the commissioner continued. I've been fielding calls all morning about this incident. The video is everywhere. The mayor's office is demanding answers, community leaders are organizing a town hall, and the press is camped outside the county building. I understand, Commissioner, Sheriff Daniels replied calmly. We're conducting a thorough investigation, and we'll have preliminary findings by the end of the week. That may not be soon enough, the commissioner said, his voice tense. There's significant public pressure for immediate action. Some are calling for Officer Taylor's termination before the investigation is even complete. Sheriff Daniels exchanged glances with Reynolds before responding. Commissioner, I understand the pressure, but we need to follow proper procedure. That said, our preliminary review has uncovered concerning patterns in Officer Taylor's conduct that extend beyond this single incident. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I see, the commissioner said finally. That changes things. Dr. Wilson leaned forward. Commissioner Fletcher, if I may, I believe this situation presents an opportunity for meaningful reform, not just punishment of one officer. I've shared some proposals with Sheriff Daniels that I think could help prevent incidents like this in the future. What kind of proposals? The commissioner asked, sounding intrigued despite himself. As Dr. Wilson briefly outlined her ideas, Sheriff Daniels watched Reynolds's expression shift from skepticism to thoughtful consideration. By the time Dr. Wilson finished speaking, even the commissioner seemed impressed. Those are interesting suggestions, Dr. Wilson, he said. Potentially costly, but given the circumstances, cost may not be the primary concern at the moment. Good policing isn't cheap, Commissioner, Sheriff Daniels added. But poor policing costs even more, in trust, in community safety, and yes, in potential lawsuits. Another pause. Longer this time. You make a good point, Sheriff, the commissioner conceded. I'd like to see these proposals formally presented at next week's county council meeting, and I want daily updates on the investigation into Officer Taylor. You'll have them, Sheriff Daniels promised. After the call ended, the three of them sat in silence for a moment, each processing the implications of what had just transpired. Well, Reynolds said finally, it seems we're about to embark on some significant changes. Sheriff Daniels nodded. Changes that were overdue. She turned to Dr. Wilson. This wasn't how I planned to spend my week, but I have to admit, your proposals align with reforms I've wanted to implement since taking office. Dr. Wilson's expression was resolute. What happened to me was terrible, but if it leads to positive change, at least it will have served some purpose. She stood to leave. I should go. I have a meeting with my attorney in an hour. Sheriff Daniels rose as well, extending her hand. Thank you for coming in, Dr. Wilson, and for turning this incident into an opportunity for reform rather than just retribution. As they shook hands, both women recognized something in each other, a shared determination to transform a moment of injustice into a catalyst for lasting change. 2 weeks had passed since the incident that changed everything. The county administration, building buzzed with activity as people filed into the main hearing room for what many local news outlets were calling a watershed moment for the community. Every seat was taken, with additional chairs brought in to accommodate the overflow crowd. Camera crews from 3 local stations positioned themselves at the back of the room. Dr. Wilson sat in the front row, her sister beside her for moral support. They were surrounded by familiar faces, Mrs. Patel, Mr. Rodriguez, Mrs. Thompson, and many other neighbors who had witnessed the incident firsthand. Behind them sat community leaders, civil rights advocates, and concerned citizens from across the county. At the front of the room, a long table faced the audience. 7 empty chairs waited for the disciplinary board members. To the right, another table held two chairs, one for Officer Taylor and one for her attorney. Officer Taylor sat stiffly, her expression unreadable, her attorney shuffling papers beside her. A side door opened and Sheriff Daniels entered, followed by the 6 other members of the disciplinary board, 3 senior officers from the sheriff's department, 2 civilian oversight representatives, and a retired judge who would chair the proceedings. This new composition of the board was itself a recent change, implemented just days earlier as part of the reform package proposed by Dr. Wilson and championed by Sheriff Daniels. The room fell silent as Judge Rivera, a distinguished woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair, called the hearing to order. "This disciplinary hearing is now in session," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the room without the need for a microphone. "We are here to review the conduct of Officer Rebecca Taylor in relation to the incident on Maple Avenue 2 weeks ago, as well as other relevant incidents from her service record." Officer Taylor stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. "Before we begin," Judge Rivera continued, "I want to emphasize that this is not a criminal proceeding. This board's purpose is to determine whether Officer Taylor's actions violated department policies and standards of conduct, and if so, what administrative action is appropriate." She nodded to Deputy Chief Reynolds, who stood and approached a screen set up to display evidence. "The board has reviewed the written statements, video evidence, and personnel records in advance of this hearing," Judge Rivera explained to the audience. "Today we will hear oral testimony from key witnesses, beginning with Dr. Amara Wilson." Dr. Wilson rose and moved to the witness chair position to the side of the main table. After being sworn in, she recounted the events of that afternoon, arriving home from surgery, unloading groceries, being confronted by Officer Taylor, and the escalation that followed. Her voice remained steady throughout, though emotion flickered across her face when describing how it felt to have a gun pointed at her in her own driveway. "And in your opinion, Dr. Wilson," Judge Rivera asked, "what precipitated Officer Taylor's actions that day?" Dr. Wilson paused, choosing her words carefully. "In my professional opinion, having now reviewed Officer Taylor's pattern of behavior from her record, I believe she saw someone who didn't fit her mental image of who belongs in that neighborhood. She saw my skin color first and made assumptions that led her to approach me with suspicion rather than respect." Officer Taylor's attorney stood quickly. "Objection. Dr. Wilson is not qualified to speculate on my client's thought process." "This is not a court of law, counselor," Judge Rivera reminded him. "But I will clarify, Dr. Wilson, please limit your testimony to your direct experience and observations." Dr. Wilson nodded. "Based on my direct experience, Officer Taylor approached me with hostility from the first moment, escalated the situation unnecessarily, and at no point attempted to de-escalate despite my calm cooperation." After Dr. Wilson's testimony, the board heard from several neighbors who had witnessed the incident. Mr. Rodriguez described how he began recording when he saw Officer Taylor draw her weapon. Mrs. Patel recounted her decision to call the sheriff directly. Each testimony built upon the last, creating a comprehensive picture of what had transpired. Finally, it was Officer Taylor's turn to speak. Her attorney had advised her to express remorse while emphasizing her record of service, a strategy that became clear as soon as she began. "I have served this community for 8 years, Officer Taylor said, her voice less confident than usual. "In that time, I have always tried to protect the citizens in my patrol areas. On the day in question, I made a split-second decision based on my training and experience. If that decision was incorrect, I regret it." The careful wording, "if that decision was incorrect," rather than a straightforward admission of wrongdoing, did not go unnoticed by the board members or the audience. Judge Rivera leaned forward. "Officer Taylor, the evidence shows that this was not a split-second decision. You approached Dr. Wilson without cause, escalated the situation over several minutes, and drew your weapon when there was clearly no threat. Do you acknowledge these facts?" Officer Taylor glanced at her attorney, who nodded slightly. "I acknowledge that the situation escalated," she conceded, "but I believed I was following proper procedure at the time." A murmur ran through the audience. Sheriff Daniels, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Officer Taylor, Could you point to the specific procedure that instructs officers to draw their weapon on an unarmed citizen who is simply unloading groceries at their own home? Officer Taylor had no answer for that. After a brief recess, the board returned to deliver its findings. Judge Rivera addressed the packed room. Based on the evidence presented, including video recordings, witness testimony, and review of Officer Taylor's service record, this board has reached a unanimous decision. The room fell completely silent. We find that Officer Rebecca Taylor violated multiple department policies regarding use of force, de-escalation requirements, and respectful treatment of citizens. Furthermore, our review of her service record reveals a concerning pattern of similar, though less severe, incidents targeting minority residents. Officer Taylor's face paled as Judge Rivera continued. The board recommends immediate termination of Officer Taylor's employment with the County Sheriff's Department, revocation of her law enforcement certification within this state, and a formal apology to Dr. Wilson and the community. The audience erupted in a mix of reactions, some applauding, others simply nodding in solemn agreement. Officer Taylor sat frozen, her attorney already scribbling notes for a potential appeal. Judge Rivera raised her hand for silence. This is not a moment for celebration. The failure here is not just of one officer, but of systems that allowed these patterns to go unaddressed for too long. Which brings me to the second part of today's proceedings. She gestured to Sheriff Daniels, who stood and moved to the podium. 2 weeks ago, Sheriff Daniels began, our community witnessed a failure of policing, but in the aftermath, something remarkable happened. Instead of just seeking punishment, Dr. Wilson challenged us to do better. She nodded toward Dr. Wilson in acknowledgement. Today, I'm announcing the implementation of a comprehensive reform package that has been unanimously approved by the County Council. Sheriff Daniels outlined the key components of the reforms: enhanced de-escalation training, a new civilian oversight committee with real authority, body cameras with automatic activation and public access to footage, regular analysis of officer interaction data to identify concerning patterns, and community policing initiatives designed to build relationships between officers and the neighborhoods they served. Most significantly, she continued, we're establishing the Community Safety Partnership, which will be co-chaired by myself and Dr. Wilson. This partnership will bring together law enforcement, medical professionals, mental health experts, and community representatives to develop new approaches to public safety. The room broke into applause, louder this time. Dr. Wilson, though pleased, maintained a reserved expression. She understood, better than most, that announcements were just the beginning. The real work lay ahead. After the hearing concluded, people gathered in small groups outside the administration building. News crews interviewed key participants, including Dr. Wilson, who spoke about looking forward rather than backward. What happened to me was traumatic, she told a reporter. But the real tragedy would be if nothing changed as a result. These reforms aren't just about punishing one officer. They're about creating a system where incidents like this don't happen in the first place. Across the plaza, Officer Taylor exited the building with her attorney, slipping quickly into a waiting car to avoid the press. Her face showed a mix of anger and disbelief. She still didn't fully understand what she had done wrong. Sheriff Daniels watched from the steps, noting the contrast between the two women, one having learned and grown from the experience, the other still resistant to recognizing her own biases. Later that evening, Dr. Wilson sat on her porch with her sister, watching the sunset over the neighborhood that had rallied around her. Mrs. Patel stopped by with a homemade cake. Mr. Rodriguez and his family waved from across the street. The community that had witnessed her humiliation was now witnessing her triumph, not just personal vindication but meaningful systemic change. You know, her sister said, when you called me that day I was terrified. All I could think was not my sister too. But you've turned it into something I never expected. Dr. Wilson nodded, watching a group of children riding bikes down the street, some black, some white, some brown, all laughing together, oblivious to the adult complexities of the world around them. That's why it matters, she said quietly. It's not just about what happened to me. It's about making sure those kids grow up in a community where everyone is treated with dignity and respect by those sworn to protect them, and by each other. Her phone chimed with a message from Sheriff Daniels. First partnership meeting confirmed for Tuesday. Ready to get to work? Dr. Wilson smiled as she typed her response. Ready. The road ahead would not be easy. Changing entrenched systems and attitudes never was. But as Dr. Wilson looked out at her neighborhood, at the people who had stood up for her when it mattered most, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon after having a gun pointed at her. Hope. Real, sustainable hope. Not just for justice in her case, but for the kind of community-wide transformation that could prevent the next incident before it happened. The kind of change that might, someday, make stories like hers a relic of the past, rather than a headline, in the present, and that was worth all the work to come.